What is left when the glory has faded? When the great walls are dust and the holy temple is a memory? For a people who have lost their kingdom, their pride, and their home, what remains? Under the harsh sun, amidst the ruins of Jerusalem, a generation born in exile toils to rebuild a city they know only from stories. The new temple stands on the holy mountain, a functional shadow of Solomon's legendary splendor, a constant reminder of all that was lost. For the young, like the laborer Eleazar, whose eyes hold the emptiness of a forgotten past, only the old tales endure. But in those tales lies their very survival. In them is the thread that connects this broken generation to the dawn of time itself, the proof that they did not spring from nothing and will not fade into dust. In the quiet of the night, by the flickering light of an oil lamp, an old scribe, the chronicler, unrolls a long scroll. With a steady hand, he begins to weave together the tapestry of his people, his voice a low whisper as he writes the names that anchor their existence. Adam, Seth, Enosh.
Each name is a strand in the fabric of history, from Adam to Noah, from Shem to Abraham. This is no mere list of forgotten ancestors. It is the story of humanity, woven by the hand of God Himself. It is the evidence that He has not abandoned them, even when the world has collapsed around them. The list flows onward through the sons of Ishmael and Esau, until the chronicler's finger pauses. His voice fills with reverence as he traces the most vital lineage. The sons of Israel, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. In the chaos of history, two threads of promise were never broken, two hopes that sustain the people to this day. The line of the king from Judah and the line of the priest from Levi. The hope for a righteous throne and the hope for pure worship. The next day, as the Levite reads the new scroll to the weary workers, the names are no longer just echoes. The list of kings from David down to their own time connects the legends of their grandfathers to their present reality. This is more than a history lesson. It is a national healing. For a community that felt orphaned and uprooted, each name recited was a link reforged in the chain of God's covenant. It was a powerful sermon declaring, "You still belong. God's promise still stands."
In Eleazar's eyes, a flicker of purpose is kindled. He is not just a builder of walls. He is a link in that chain. The story is not over. And the promise of a king and a temple lives on in every stone they lay in hope of a new dawn. That hope for a king brings us to the stark contrast between two rulers. First, there was Saul. On the battlefield of Mount Gilboa, the armies of Israel are shattered by Philistine war chariots. King Saul, wounded and defeated, begs his armor-bearer, "Kill me before these pagans capture and torture me." But when the young man hesitates, Saul falls on his own sword. So died Saul for his unfaithfulness to the Lord. He had not kept the word of the Lord and had even consulted a medium for guidance instead. Therefore, the Lord put him to death and turned the kingdom over to David, son of Jesse. A crown without heaven's blessing is merely a weight that drags its wearer to ruin.
The scene shifts. The chaos of Gilboa gives way to the sunlit peace of Hebron, where David, the new king, receives delegations from every tribe of Israel. They come not by decree, but with a unified heart to make him king. Warriors from Gad with faces like lions, skilled archers from Benjamin, and wise men from Issachar who understood the times. The nation, once broken, was becoming one. The chronicler presents an idealized portrait of David. For the post-exilic community, this image was a blueprint for the future, the embodiment of hope for a messianic king who would one day reunite all of God's people. The coronation becomes a 3-day festival of feasting and joy. The hills around Hebron glow with campfires as the nation celebrates. There is an abundance of food and wine, music and laughter. The wounds of division begin to heal. A new chapter of unity, purpose, and hope had begun under a king after God's own heart.
With the kingdom united, David turns to his next great task, to bring the Ark of God, the very symbol of his presence, to the heart of Jerusalem. The first attempt is a grand, joyous procession, a national celebration with music and dancing. The intent was pure, the heart was sincere. But they forgot to consult the law of God. The ark is placed on a new ox cart, a Philistine method, not an Israelite one. At the threshing floor of Kidon, the oxen stumble, the cart lurches. Uzzah, acting on instinct, reaches out to steady the sacred ark. The moment his hand touches the holy object, he falls dead. A terrible silence descends. Joy turns to horror. David, shaken and afraid, cries out, "How can I ever bring the ark of God home now?" On that day, David learned a vital lesson. God's holiness is not to be treated with casual familiarity. It demands reverence. It demands obedience. Frightened, David diverts the ark to the house of Obed-Edom, a Levite. For 3 months, the house of Obed-Edom is blessed beyond measure. His fields prosper, his flocks multiply. David understands. The same divine presence that brought judgment upon presumption brought blessing upon reverent hospitality. The fault was not with God, but how they had approached him.
The second attempt is entirely different. There is no carnival, but a solemn reverence. The priests and Levites purify themselves. The Kohathites, the clan designated for the task, lift the ark onto their shoulders using long poles, never touching the sacred box itself. The music is not a chaotic noise, but a powerful, ordered liturgy. This time, David did as Moses had commanded. He understood that national restoration begins with the restoration of right worship. As the procession enters Jerusalem, David, dressed not in royal robes but in the simple linen of a priest, dances before the Lord with all his might, a king who is first a worshiper, celebrating the arrival of his true king. The ark is placed in its tent, sacrifices are offered, and the people are blessed. At last, the presence of God was at the center of Israel. Worship had found its home, and the king had become the nation's chief worshiper. The city of David had become the city of God, and the foundation for the future temple was laid not in stone, but in an act of pure and ordered devotion.
At the height of his power, King David walked through his palace of cedar, a testament to his earthly success. Yet a divine discontent stirred in his heart. Looking out his window, he saw the humble tent that housed the Ark of the Covenant and said to the prophet Nathan, "Here I am, living in a house of cedar, while the Ark of God remains in a tent." He resolved to build a magnificent temple, and Nathan encouraged the king to follow his pious desire. But the plans of men, however noble, are not always the plans of God. That very night, the word of the Lord came to Nathan, revealing a divine reversal of plans. God did not need a house built by human hands. He had been the one to lift David from the sheep pastures and make him a prince over Israel. Man proposes, but God disposes. David sought to build a house for God, but he was about to learn that God intended to build an eternal house for him.
The next day, Nathan delivered the stunning message. The Lord declares to you that the Lord himself will establish a house for you. David, the king, would not build the temple. Instead, God would establish David's dynasty, and his own son would be the one to build it, with a throne that would endure forever. The king was speechless, not with disappointment, but with overwhelming awe. He, a former shepherd, was being promised an everlasting kingdom. Humbled and grateful, David went before the Ark of the Covenant and sat on the floor. "Who am I, sovereign Lord?" he prayed, "and what is my family that you have brought me this far? And as if this were not enough, you have spoken about the future of your servant's house." This was the heart of true faith, not what David could do for God, but what God, in his infinite grace, would do for David. For the exiled community hearing this story centuries later, this Davidic covenant was the bedrock of their hope, the promise that a son of David would one day come to reign forever.
The Lord's wars were the forge in which the kingdom was secured. In fierce campaigns against the Philistines, Moabites, and Arameans, God gave David victory wherever he went. Each battle, though costly, was a necessary step toward the hard-won peace that would allow the temple to be built. From conquered nations, a river of treasure flowed into Jerusalem, bronze, silver, and gold, all consecrated not for the king's glory, but for the future house of God. Years later, an older David, his hair now gray, walked his son Solomon through the royal treasury. With an intense gaze, he shared the word the Lord had given him. "You have shed much blood and have fought many wars. You are not to build a house for my name." The warrior's chapter was closing. The temple, God's dwelling place, was to be built in an era of peace by a man of peace. The mantle was now passing to Solomon. Before a great assembly of Israel's leaders, the old king presented the vast resources and detailed plans he had prepared. Then he turned to his son and publicly passed the torch. "And you, my son Solomon, acknowledge the God of your father, and serve him with wholehearted devotion. Be strong and courageous, and do the work. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord God, my God, is with you." The transition was complete.
David did not just dream of the temple, he organized its very lifeblood. Thousands of Levites were assigned to their new roles: gatekeepers, officials, judges, and above all, musicians, appointed to lead the worship with harps, lyres, and cymbals. This was not just an administration, it was the creation of a living liturgy for generations to come. Before all the people, David presented his own personal treasure and then issued a challenge. Now, who is willing to consecrate themselves to the Lord today? The response was an outpouring of joyful generosity. Leaders and common people alike brought forth their gold, silver, bronze, and iron, not as a tax, but as a celebration. The treasure piled high, gleaming in the sun, and King David rejoiced to see the willing spirit of his people. With the offerings gathered, David raised his hands in a final public prayer. "Yours, Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory. Wealth and honor come from you. You are the ruler of all things." He blessed the people and charged Solomon to build the holy sanctuary. And in a moment of profound unity, the entire assembly bowed down and worshipped. David, son of Jesse, died at a good old age, having enjoyed a long life, wealth, and honor.
The crown passed to Solomon without contest or bloodshed, a peaceful succession that stood as God's ideal, a stark contrast to the violent power struggles that would plague other kingdoms. On the peaceful face of the dead king was the end of an era. On the determined face of the young king was the dawn of a new one, bearing both the weight and the promise of the kingdom.
With the kingdom secured and the plans of his father in hand, the young King Solomon felt the immense weight of his calling. In a dream, God appeared to him with an offer. "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." Solomon, in his youth, did not ask for long life or riches or victory over his enemies. He asked for wisdom, a discerning heart to govern God's great people and to know the difference between right and wrong. This humble request pleased the Lord, who granted him not only unparalleled wisdom, but also the wealth and honor he had not requested. And so began the most ambitious construction project Israel had ever known. For 7 years, Mount Moriah was a scene of silent, sacred industry. The sounds of hammers and chisels were absent from the holy site, as every stone was quarried and shaped beforehand. Fleets of ships brought the finest cedar from Lebanon, and the master artisan Huram Abi, a genius in bronze, gold, and fine fabrics, arrived from Tyre to craft the temple's most intricate furnishings. While Solomon's own palace was a wonder of architecture, taking 13 years to complete with its grand hall of justice and the house of the forest of Lebanon, the temple was the true jewel of the kingdom.
At its entrance stood 2 colossal bronze pillars, named Jachin and Boaz, their capitals intricately decorated with lilies and pomegranates. In the courtyard, the Great Bronze Sea, a massive basin holding over 10,000 gallons of water, rested on the backs of 12 bronze oxen. Inside, the walls were sheathed in pure gold, engraved with figures of cherubim, palm trees, and flowers. And in the innermost sanctuary, the Holy of Holies, 2 giant cherubim of olive wood, overlaid with gold, spread their wings to guard the space where the Ark of the Covenant would finally rest. When the work was complete, all of Israel gathered. The priests carried the ark into its final resting place. As they did, a thick cloud, the very glory of the Lord, filled the temple, so overwhelming that the priests could not stand to perform their duties. Solomon, standing on a bronze platform, lifted his hands to heaven and dedicated the great house to God. As he finished his prayer, fire descended from the sky, consuming the sacrifices on the altar. The people, overcome with awe, fell with their faces to the ground and worshipped. The reign of Solomon became a legendary age of peace and prosperity. His wisdom was famed throughout the known world, drawing the great queen of Sheba from her distant land to test him with her hardest questions. She arrived with a magnificent caravan of camels bearing spices, gold, and precious stones. When she witnessed the splendor of his court, the organization of his officials, the food on his table, and the breathtaking beauty of the temple, she was left breathless. "The half was not told me," she confessed. "Your wisdom and prosperity far exceed the report I heard." Wealth poured into Jerusalem. Gold became so plentiful that silver was considered of little value. Solomon built a fleet of trading ships and imported horses and chariots from Egypt, establishing a formidable military that secured the nation's borders. But beneath this golden veneer, the seeds of decay were being sown. The opulence was financed by heavy taxation and forced labor. The reliance on foreign alliances and military strength began to eclipse the nation's reliance on God. After a glorious 40-year reign, Solomon died and was buried in the city of David.
His son, Rehoboam, traveled to Shechem to be crowned king. There, the people, represented by Jeroboam, who would return from exile in Egypt, made a reasonable request. Your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy taxes, and we will serve you. Rehoboam, in an act of youthful pride, dismissed the advice of the old men who had served his father and who urged him to be a servant to the people. Instead, he listened to the arrogant counsel of his peers. His answer to the people sealed the kingdom's fate. "My father laid a heavy yoke on you," he declared with shocking contempt. "I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions." Hearing this, the 10 northern tribes erupted in rebellion. "What share do we have in David?" they cried. "To your tents, O Israel!" The kingdom was torn in two. Rehoboam was left to rule over Judah and Benjamin, but the unified empire of his father was shattered.
The consequences of this folly were swift. Because they had forsaken the Lord, Rehoboam and his kingdom were punished. Shishak, the pharaoh of Egypt, swept into the land with a massive army of chariots and horsemen. He conquered the fortified cities and marched on Jerusalem. To save the capital from utter destruction, Rehoboam surrendered all the treasures of the Lord's temple and the royal palace, including the magnificent golden shields Solomon had made. In their place, he fashioned shields of bronze. The gold was gone, replaced by an inferior metal, a tragic and fickle symbol of a kingdom's faded glory. After the kingdom divided, the history of Judah became a tragic rhythm of good kings and bad, a nation swaying between faithfulness and idolatry. Yet in the midst of this decline, there were brilliant flashes of hope. King Hezekiah, facing the might of the Assyrian Empire, placed his trust not in political maneuvering, but in God. He cleansed the temple, tore down the pagan altars, and led a national return to true worship. In preparation for the inevitable siege, he undertook incredible feats of engineering, fortifying Jerusalem with the broad wall and digging a tunnel deep beneath the city to secure its water supply, works confirmed by archaeology to this day.
Generations later, the young King Josiah rediscovered a long-forgotten scroll of God's law in the temple. Hearing its words, he tore his robes in grief and launched the most sweeping religious reformation in Judah's history. He purged the land of every idol, from the high places in the hills to the cults of Baal and Asherah that had defiled Jerusalem itself. For a brief, glorious moment, the covenant was renewed, and the nation turned back to God with all its heart. But the light of these reforms could not hold back the encroaching darkness. Josiah's successors plunged the nation back into rebellion, and God's patience finally reached its end. The prophet Jeremiah wept and warned, but his words fell on deaf ears. From the east, the mighty Babylonian Empire, led by King Nebuchadnezzar, descended upon the land. The city of Jerusalem, which had stood for centuries, was doomed. The destruction was absolute. Solomon's temple, the magnificent house of gold and cedar that had been the heart of Israel, was plundered and burned until it was nothing but ash. The city walls were torn down, and the people, the priests, the artisans, the royal family were led away in chains to exile in Babylon. This final tragic chapter is confirmed not only in Scripture, but in Babylonian records that detail the capture of King Jehoiachin. The promise seemed broken. The land was desolate, the king was a captive, and the temple was a smoking ruin.
Yet for the chronicler, writing to the descendants of these exiles, the story could not end in ashes. The exile was not a conclusion, but a crucible. And after 70 years, just as the prophets had foretold, God moved again. He stirred the heart of the most powerful man on earth, Cyrus the Great, king of Persia. The book of Chronicles closes on a stunning note of hope, a royal decree that reversed the tide of history. This is what Cyrus, king of Persia, says:
The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has appointed me to build a temple for him at Jerusalem in Judah. Any of his people among you may go up, and may the Lord, their God, be with them." The story comes full circle. The tapestry that seemed to have been torn to shreds begins to be rewoven. The journey that began with a broken people rebuilding a wall now finds its divine purpose. The thread of God's promise was never truly broken. The hope for a king and a temple, the guiding theme of the entire chronicle, was alive. The command to go up was not just an order to return home. It was an invitation to step back into the grand, unfolding story of God.